The dream starts with me waiting for someone to collect me in a small flying vehicle. It arrived a short distance away and I walked towards it. Then the front opened up and I stepped in. I recognized the pilot and asked her how things are. The usual stuff, you know. I'm flying with the pilot, who I know, and we get onto the subject of Japan. She asked if I'm up to date with what's been going on. What happened was he picked on one group and decided to engage with them through his watchers. The group lived in a mountainous area about 2,000 kilometers north, well, maybe northeast of Tantal, or Atlantis. The place was called the Cursed Mountains. They were named that because it was where one of the tribes came from that had tormented the Tantals before the time of Uran, before they moved to Tantal. But that's another story. So anyway, Japan sent a large group of watchers to the mountains to learn about the people and to work out how to convert them to the new cult of Japan. This was something most people in Tantal found very uncomfortable, I think because everyone knew that he was really a bit bonkers. But he may have been bat-dropping crazy, but he was even more scary than he was crazy. So the watchers are watching and putting together a plan for achieving Japan's demands. At least that's what they started off trying to do. Eventually, as a group, they decide how ridiculous it is, and they conclude that they really should just leave Tantal and join up with this primitive group instead, and have a more simple life. There were 200 of them that agreed to leave. They were mostly the young ones of under 100 years old, so they had not yet finished their education. Many of them had barely even left their parents. Before formally leaving Tantal, they did return to say their goodbyes and to take with them whatever they needed from when they left. People were permitted to leave, but they just could never return once they had left. So making a decision like that was kind of final, really. There was a young couple who actually led the group and convinced everyone to leave, and they were called Sem and Yaga. They were in love, and they thought it was ever so romantic to start over and build their own civilization away from all the craziness. They were from Tantal, so they were all tall and strong, and they were attractive to the primitives, both males and females alike. They enjoyed the new home that they had made in the wilds, and some of them even took up and had a relationship with the primitive, i.e. they took them as a mate. Others stayed with their original chosen Atlantean mate, and in both cases many children were born. The children were tall and strong like them, even the ones that had one parent that was from the primitives. The Tantals could only get pregnant if they stopped taking the cure, but they could get as many primitives pregnant as they wanted. So the women who were from Tantal had to make the choice to take the time off from the cure to have the babies and then return to it. When they had left Tantal, they did take with them things like basic food machines, tools for agriculture, basically most of the things that they would need for their comfort. But as their population grew, it couldn't really sustain them all. And there was also the problem that the children that they had would not have access to the longevity device, the cure, basically. Anyway, I'll come back to that. So they did as the primitives did and started to eat the way that the primitives had eaten originally, and that included eating meat. And when the animals were scarce, they even hunted and ate their enemies, enemy primitives. Pretty horrific stuff, really. So by this stage, the news of their activities had reached both Japay, the current ruler, and Uran, the much-loved original leader of Tantal. Uran stayed firm with his non-interference policy, but his wife, Haya, pleaded with him. She said, "We need to stop these people. They need to do something because they could give the primitives tools for destruction." But Uran stood firm. Then, as predicted by Haya, the outcasts used the knowledge that they had of metals to start making weapons. One built a forge, and not only used it to make weapons, but also taught those who were primitive how to do the same thing and how to use it. They taught other things as well, but nothing as dangerous as making weapons. So, in true Japay form, he sent more people to watch and report back. But this time he sent his most trusted guards. And these were the ones from his special military police force. The four that he sent were utterly horrified, but did nothing. They just watched and, of course, reported back. Here's where the story gets even more interesting. A really gentle, kind man by the name of Idreah, a primitive, was taught by one of the original watchers of Tantal the skill of writing. So he was picked by the new watchers to be a person to contact. So Idreah was specifically targeted because it was convenient. He regularly would leave the village to get quiet time with his thoughts, and so that was where he was approached by the new watchers. Let's call them Japay's A-team. Japay decided to get his A-team to send the other watchers, the outcast watchers, send them a message through Idreah. So they went to see Idreah in typical mystical Japay fashion, just so that he would take it thoroughly seriously. And they asked Idreah to return to his village with a message to the original watchers to please stop making and teaching weapons. And if they did that, Japay would forgive them and they could continue doing all the other stuff. The A-team told Idreah to return to the same place to meet them again in a couple of days with the response from the outcast watchers. And after 2 days, the original outcast watchers returned a message through Idreah as it was instructed, and it said that yes, they would stop. They knew the consequences of not obeying Japay, but here's where their stupidity shouldn't really surprise. Only the original outcast watchers stopped making weapons, and those primitives that they had already taught how to do it, they just kept on going, and the watchers had no ability to stop them without killing them. And also by this stage, some of that knowledge had gone as far as other human groups. It's the sort of knowledge that does tend to spread. So Japay sent another message through Idreah, and this time it was more threatening. The original outcast watchers begged to be allowed to return and leave behind them all the terrible things that they'd actually caused. But the answer was no, fix it. Kill all the primitives who know about this in your village, then leave and find the others that know and get them as well. And if they do this terrible thing in time, the request would be considered by Japay. The original outcast watchers did what they could to stop the knowledge of metal weapons, but they couldn't bring themselves to kill the people that they'd lived with and trained and had families with. Sadly, the damage couldn't be reversed, and the primitives spread the knowledge of weapons much further. And that happened fairly quickly. The original Watchers were now in a very difficult position. They were hated by the people that they had adopted, even the ones they'd had children with. As time went by, they also had the problem that their primitive family grew old and would die in front of them because they couldn't give them the ability to have the cure for aging. The pilot went on to tell me that apparently Japay had told everyone back in Tantal that he had punished the outcasts for various offences ranging from gifting the primitives things that they shouldn't know through to stealing things from Tantal. So he had made up kind of a weird story of strange punishments in order to scare any other Tantals from ever crossing him. In reality, of course, the outcast watchers were in a much better place, and that was not in the proverbial sense. And this is the story that the pilot told me as we were returning to see my brother. And I was even able at that time to meet one of the surviving team when I had got to Uran's home. So you might think that that must be where the story ends, but no, it's not. It continues with what happened to Idreah, because he'd acted as a messenger and he'd been loyal to Japay. So when he requested to visit Tantal, Japay agreed, and he was collected by the Watchers and he went to visit Tantal. So he was collected in a small flying device and taken to Japay at the Great University. The man was stunned by the beautiful white and red stone buildings. At first, everything scared him. Flying scared him, landing scared him. The lights behind the building, around the building, in front of the building, everything scared him. But he was as brave as he could be, and he was very happy to have been invited. Japay was waiting at the end of a large, well-lit hall, and he was sitting on a chair on a short pedestal, looking very much like one of his gigantic statues. After looking sufficiently impressive for a while, Japay stepped down to welcome this timid man. Japay tried to make conversation in the man's own language. It was not easy, but Japay persisted, and he asked Idreah many questions about his life. Idreah answered quietly, in a wise and intelligent way. Japay then asked, "What is the most important thing in your life? What makes you happy?" Idreah said that meeting him was the most important thing that had ever happened in his life. Japay persisted with what else is important. He then said family is important. After more prodding, Idreah said that knowledge and learning is what really makes his life a joy. At this response, Japay saw an opportunity and asked if he would like to live and be educated here in Tantau. Idreah said it would be a gift unsurpassable. Idreah was so impressed and so subservient to the mighty Japay that Japay was instantly taken with the man. He later told his team that he wanted all the primitives to be just like Idreah. He wanted to learn from Idreah how he could motivate the other primitives to feel and act the same way. And so it was decided that not only would Idreah begin his education, but he would also be taken under the wing of Japay. So Idreah already had some basic education from the outcasted watchers from the previous story, so he was sufficiently primed to at least start at the first university. He was also given the device for the cure for aging. Idreah asked Japay, before starting his education, if he might let his family know that he's going away, and of course this was agreed to. Japay advised him that he would be first shown the wonders of Tantau, the universities, etc., before being taken home. He was given a small device so that the Tantals could contact him when they needed to, and he was told that he could take his time and get everything in order before he returned to begin his education, because it's possible he may never see his family again. And Idreah accepted that. He was then taken to visit each of the universities, or the ones that were still remaining in Tantau, and shown how important their work is. When he arrived at the University for Primitive Studies, which was now located on the outskirts of Tantau, he was pleased to meet the people there, because they were the same people that he'd met before. He was shown how the watchers dress like the people of the area they're watching, and so as not to scare them too much, they look as much like the ordinary people as possible. And finally, in Tantau, he was taken to the Hall of Memories and the House of the Lost Ones. The Hall of Memories was where every Atlantean who had died since the beginning of Tantau is remembered. Their pictures, their voices, their achievements, their favourite items are all kept for those who wish to visit and remember. But since so few Atlanteans die, it was treated as a very, very special place. Then he was shown the House of the Lost Ones, a much less impressive building for those who've actually left Tantau or who have been cast out as a punishment. This too was an important place to remember those lost. On occasion, a lost person would return and there would be a great celebration, and their image was then removed from the House of the Lost Ones. He was then taken to see other places of importance outside of Tantau, but which were in fact part of Tantau. So he was taken to the University of Applied Energy in Chem. On the way to Chem, they stopped at an ancient lake that had dried up. His companions showed him the bones of great aquatic animals that once lived in the sea in that area. These were whales. Idreah marvelled at the size of these creatures and wondered how could it be possible that there was once water here and now there was just a graveyard of all these creatures. And his companions said that all would become clear when he was educated, when he became knowing. Once in Chem, they showed him the mountains of beautiful cut rock that were the pyramids, the ones, that we see even today. They also showed him the great yellow pyramid obelisk, which is lost to us today. After Chem, they continued the tour. As he flew over the land, he was fascinated with the rivers, lakes, mountains, seas, and even a volcano. It was all so fabulous to him, and he was no longer scared. They visited Thebe, and he was amazed by their knowledge of the skies. And at last, he was returned to his family. He was reminded how to use the communication device and how long he had. They told him that as soon as he contacted them, they would come at noon the following day to their usual meeting place to collect him, and then they left. There were many terrible things happening at this time: rising water levels, earthquakes, impacts from asteroids, floods, etc. So it was difficult times. Idreah made sure he had everything in order for his family. He taught his eldest son how to be the head of the family and to look after everyone. He did not tell them when he would be going. On the day he was sure that his family was ready, he contacted Tantal. The following day he handed his communication device to his son, explained how to use them both, and then left. He knew he was not supposed to do that, but he hoped Japay would understand. Japay was not in the habit of being very understanding, but this man, this primitive, was special to him. This was the first person to ever love, respect, fear, and admire him all at the same time. It was intoxicating, and Japay wanted more of that. So when Idreah talked to Japay about the communication device and the device for the cure to aging, Japay acted like it was fine, and Idreah was given replacement devices for his own use. The only concern Idreah had was that the device that he'd left with his son had to be refilled at certain intervals, which required access to a certain plant, but he'd cross that bridge later when the time got close. Idreah was very hard-working at the universities, but his first 10 years were a terrible struggle for him. The School of Numbers was the foundation for all other studies, so instead of moving on to the next subject area, he spent a further 6 years on mathematics and measurement. He did not move on to the next university until he was sure that he was ready. In the meantime, Japay had sent watchers to monitor and protect Idreah's family. Everything was going well. Crops grew, and the children of Idreah all took partners. Time passed, and the grandchildren of Idreah grew to be adult. His oldest grandson married a woman who he loved very much, but for whatever reason she could not have children. The watchers reported back to Japay about how she would cry about being barren. I don't have any names for these people, I'm sorry. It wasn't in the dream. So I'll just refer to them as grandchildren or whatever. Anyway, Japay decided he would do something that wasn't previously permitted in Tantal. He would clone himself. They had the technology, they just didn't do it. But he decided that that's what he would do, and he would gift the fetus to Idreah's grandson and granddaughter-in-law, or whatever they were. It was a weird gift, especially if you don't really tell them about it. I've no idea how the watchers took the woman, but somehow they did. They repaired her damaged reproductive system and implanted her with a baby, and 9 months later, a beautiful but very unusual looking baby was born. After that, she was able to have more children as well, so they were very happy about that. But needless to say, it was a bit of a surprise, especially the way the baby looked. At the same time, there were more earthquakes and strange goings-on with the weather, and this all scared the people. They thought that something terrible was happening. So Idreah's son decided that now was the time to use the communication device. So this was the first time he did it. And not knowing really how to use it, he pushed the pedal, as described by his father, and then yelled at the top of his voice, "Hello, hello, hello." And when a gentle voice of his father came back, he was stunned, and he searched the room for his father, trying to see where he might be. His father said, "I will try to come tomorrow to see you. Please be patient." Idreah immediately made his request, and he was permitted to go. But Jeppe told him to tell his family that it was all okay, and that Jeppe had just sent them the child as a gift in order to comfort the crying woman in the family. He reassured his family, and then he returned to Tantal. But once this baby was born, Jeppe was taking a very special interest in everything to do with it. Obviously, he thought it was a very special baby. There were always watchers around, making sure nothing happened to the little Jeppe. I don't know the name of the child, so let's call him LJ for little Jeppe. He was concerned, was Jeppe, that the watchers wouldn't necessarily keep a good enough eye on little Jeppe, LJ. So Jeppe, who already had some very amazing animated metal guard dogs, which had been built many years earlier, he decided to send one of these animals to guard the little Jeppe, because, metal guard dogs never sleep. So as the child grew each year and his family were doing well, Jeppe sent other special gifts. He was also taught by the watchers how to read and write. He was taught how to build things with his hands, how to make medicine from the plants in the area, and many, many other things. All these things that were taught to the boy were then well documented by the boy and became the repository of information for his family. When LJ, the child, reached the age of 20, his great-grandfather, Idreah, was permitted to visit him. So a great celebration was held. Idreah told his family of the wonderful things he'd learned and all the adventures he'd had. In the middle of the celebration, there was, however, an earthquake, and Idreah thought he'd better immediately return to Tantal. It was the time of lots of different disruptions that were happening in the world. Idreah was still concerned that his family may be in danger, but he did know that Jeppe would protect LJ, because LJ was just like him. But what about the rest of his family? Jeppe said there was nothing to worry about. But Jeppe was actually quite clearly distracted on other things. At this time he was focused on trying to get the other primitives to worship him, and he was also organizing his scientists to create technology that would enable him to defeat his enemies, most of which were in Neath. But Idreah could sense there was more. Some scientists had been accused of working against what Jeppe wanted, and they were punished rather extremely by death. This made all the scientists very edgy, but word got around that what happened to the scientists was because of the various things happening with the weather and the earthquakes and the asteroids that were coming and hitting the Earth. And of course everyone was pretty concerned about it. But Jeppe was not concerned. He was too busy planning and scheming. He had particularly good plans for LJ. Especially now LJ was a man. Jeppe would build him a city and then make him a king. Not only would he be the first real king of the primitives, LJ would ensure that his people worshipped Jeppe the way that Jeppe wanted to be worshipped. A team of builders were sent out to find the perfect location for the new city. It needed to be near fresh water, have fertile soil, and be easily defended. The location was found and a new city was built. People from all around the area came to the city. They liked what they saw and they stayed. And LJ was king. He wasn't too bad as a leader, and he made sure that there were plenty of temples to Japé and that Japé got the adoration he required. Idreah would occasionally visit, but he knew that he could never leave the side of Japé. He could never leave Tantal. As for the city, everything was going swimmingly for about 500 years or so. And then it started to actually go swimmingly. But that's another story. So one could say that Idreah lived happily ever after in Tantal with Japé. And one could say that he had a lovely family who also had a wonderful existence, and one of his offspring became a king. But there is actually a lot more to the story. But that's going to have to be at another time, because these are all just little bits of a jigsaw puzzle that I'm putting together.